When Quebec Liberal MP Joël Lightbound broke ranks with his party this week, he said the Trudeau government had become perhaps the most divisive government in Canadian history, and he didn't want any part of that. He's absolutely right. It's incredibly divisive. In fact, they've won the last two elections, despite the fact they've only won minorities. They've won the last two elections by dividing up Canadians as precisely as they can, just so they can stay in power. They don't care about pitting one Canadian against another, one region against another. It doesn't matter to them so long as they stay in power. And you want a very good example of how divisive they are, how angry they are? Oh, they talk about being progressives and how they're going to reconcile everyone to everyone else. But you know what they're going to do in response to the Freedom Convoy blockade in downtown Ottawa? No, I'm tired of the blockade. I think the blockaders have made their point to the extent that they know what their point is. And I think it's time they go home. They'll do much better at home, putting pressure on their MPs and their MLAs to get the federal and provincial governments to lift the restrictions they dislike. They do far better at home doing that than angering people in downtown Ottawa and potentially setting off a pretty ugly scene if the police and maybe the military have to come in and get rid of them. But you know what Trudeau's response to that is going to be? This convoy started off to get Ottawa to drop its requirement that cross-border truck drivers should have to be vaccinated in order to get back into Canada. And you know what Trudeau's going to do? Instead of getting rid of that mandate, he's now talking about imposing a mandate on interprovincial truck drivers. So if you got a truck driver who only drives around in your own province, he or she is regulated by the provincial government. But as soon as they cross a provincial border, they become interprovincial truckers, and they are the responsibility of the federal government. And Trudeau and the Liberal government is thinking of bringing in a vaccine mandate for interprovincial truckers. Now, I thought the mandate for cross-border truckers from the United States to Canada was unnecessary because, A, the pandemic is starting to wane. It's starting to die out. But B, even before there were vaccines, they were given special exemption, the truckers were. And after they had vaccines, they were given special exemptions. And there's no evidence that the truckers were spreading pandemic around. This is a hysterical reaction on the part of the federal government. It's also a political reaction. They know that the people who vote for them, this tiny group that they've hived off from all the rest of Canadians, that group will vote for them because they're in favor of being nasty and mean to people who disagree with them. And in this case, it's truckers. In fact, you want to know how political they are? You want to know how nasty and mean they are? Most of the provinces in the country, BC, is getting rid of its pandemic restrictions slowly. Alberta and Saskatchewan doing it quite quickly. Quebec is going in sort of a middle ground. They're getting rid of most of their restrictions by about the end of March. They think they'll probably keep their vaccine passports around indefinitely, maybe permanently. But they've given up on the idea of taxing people who are unvaccinated. Most of the provinces, even Ontario, which is as slow as any province at getting rid of its restrictions, most of the provinces are getting rid of them. The federal government instead breaks ranks with all of the rest of the governments in the country and imposes this vaccine mandate on cross-border truckers. And now, in response to the angry demonstrations in downtown Ottawa, they're going to try and impose a vaccine mandate on interprovincial truckers. Because the science says the pandemic is dying out and the vaccines won't do much good. This cannot be a science-driven policy. It must be political. They know that the people who vote for them, the baristas in downtown Toronto, the soft nationalists in Montreal, the people who aren't really separatists, but they they got their backs up a bit, and the people in Vancouver proper, they all like the idea of punishing the unvaccinated. Those unvaccinated people, they're not like us. Socially, they're very different from us, so we should punish them. And the Trudeau government, rather than making a science-driven, unifying decision, decides it's going to double down on its vaccine mandate and extend it to interprovincial truckers. Now there's some disunity for you. For Post Media, I'm Lorne Gunter.